Hello, National Readers. Welcome to our live stream this afternoon. I am joined here by Richard Murphy, who I'm sure you will all know as one of our esteemed columnists and a political economist. Today, we are going to be chatting about the public pay uplift that was announced this afternoon by Rishi Sunak at a press conference in Downing Street and what it really means for the economy. So after a year of lots and lots of strikes in the public sector, is this really everything coming to an end? Has everything been sorted out? Have the Tories suddenly discovered compassion? We're going to get into all of it just now. So, Richard, do you want to give us your immediate sort of reaction to this news? And just for those tuning in who maybe aren't aware, basically for healthcare staff in England and Wales, also for people like prison officers and I believe teachers as well, there will be a pay increase roughly between 5 and 6% across those sectors. But the UK government is refusing to increase its borrowing, which means they're going to fund it from other parts of the public sector. And one of the things that they're wanting to do is to increase the fees for people applying for visas. So people who want to come to the UK to live, to work, and to study, or even just to visit, will have to pay significantly more. And people who are living in the UK who are not UK citizens will have to pay more to access healthcare services as well. And that is about £1 billion worth that they think, but there's still a lot of money to come from other parts of the public sector. And of course, this is really Richard's area of expertise. So, Richard, I will let you explain what this all means and what your immediate reaction was.
Well, I guess my immediate reaction was to put my head in my hands and just say, God, what else can they get wrong? Because that's what it feels like to me, bluntly. This is just another disaster in the making. Let's put it in the context of what has actually been decided. I think defence forces are also covered today, by the way. I think they're going to get 5%. How that's funded, who knows? But anyway, that's, I think, also in there. So very large numbers, millions of people have had their pay decided. According to Rishi Sunak today, there is no negotiation. Now, let's be clear on this. Rishi Sunak, of course, does not negotiate pay. Excuse me.
Bless you.
Except perhaps for the armed forces in Scotland, because obviously that's a UK-wide negotiation. The pay settlements on teachers, the pay settlements on health, on social care, and many other professions will be separate in Scotland. But this does still matter. I just want to set that in the context for national readers, because the size of the budgets in England and Wales, and again, I know some of these will be devolved in Wales, but the size of the budgets there determine how much is apportioned to Scotland under the Barnett formula. So this will have a direct knock-on effect in the sense of providing no extra funding for pay settlements in Scotland either. Therefore, there will be a repercussion. The whole policy is completely bonkers, mad, stupid, designed to alienate, upset people, undermine public services. What more can I say that makes it clear how offended I am by this? But yeah, I wrote a Twitter thread when you told me that you would like to take part in this conversation, Laura, to sort of assemble my ideas. And my instant reaction was, this is deeply demotivational. I mean, there are millions of people who've just got a pay rise, which is less than the current rate of inflation. And inflation is still high. We know it is. It's 8.7%. It will be coming down over the next couple of months or so. That's almost inevitable because of the way that the numbers worked in late summer, midsummer last year. But as a consequence, these people are still all going to get pay rises which are less than the rate of inflation. Therefore, they have got less money to spend into the economy. Therefore, given that Rishi Sunak has set a target for growth, about 1 in 6 employees in the whole of the UK have now got less money to spend. I mean, wow, why do you want to do that if you want to create growth and claim that's one of the bases on which you wish to be re-elected? So electorally, pretty stupid thing to do. Also wholly unnecessary to a very large degree, particularly this claim that none of the money will be provided to the departments to cover this cost. Now, let's set that in context. In something like the NHS, around 70%, so £7 in every 10 spent, is on people. So 70% is going to go up by around 6%. So we're talking about a total increase in costs of around £3.50 in every 100 spending. That's still a lot. And that means that, frankly, services will have to be cut. But what's particularly stupid, and I can't use another word about that, is that they're forgetting that all of these pay rises actually give rise to more tax paid. So if you give somebody a pay rise on top of their existing pay, every single penny of the additional pay, given that our personal allowances, the amount we can earn tax-free each year, are fixed for the next 5 years, according to the government, irrespective of the rate of inflation. In other words, they're increasing the effective tax rate on us anyway. But given that they're fixed, then basically, as I did the numbers in this Twitter thread, look, 20% comes back to the government by way of tax out of everything they give. 12% comes back by way of employees' national insurance, which will be true for almost everybody in this pay band. And another 13.8% is paid by the employer as a consequence of the pay rise having been given. Do the numbers I have, that's my job. Near enough 40% of all the costs of the pay rise goes straight back to the Treasury in tax paid. Now, in that case, the health department is down and the Treasury is up by 40%. Now, why can't they give that 40% straight back? To at least cover part of the cost, because that would leave the Treasury in a net neutral position. But they don't. They also ignore something else, and that is that, of course, if somebody who works as a teacher, works for the NHS, works in social care, in the armed force, wherever, people who work in those areas aren't so well paid that they are living the life of Riley so strongly that they actually are saving megabucks every month. Most of them are spending every flipping penny they earn right now. That's why we have what's called a cost of living crisis, which won't affect Rishi Sunak very much, but which does most people. So, in other words, when they get paid this pay rise, they will spend it instantly because they're going to have to cover the bills. Now, whoever they spend it with will treat it as income. Now, they'll either pay tax on that income or else they will pay somebody out of that income who will then pay tax on that extra income. And whoever gets that money, if it's used to pay somebody else, which it probably will be, will then pay tax. And then they'll spend what's left over and somebody else will get some extra income and they'll pay tax. And on it goes. Now, this is in economics called the multiplier effect. And in reality, it's highly likely that the entire additional cost now being spent will eventually, somehow or other, come back by way of tax to the revenue. It takes time. There is a lag. But that's the way it fundamentally works on public services, many public services, but not defence, because there's no productivity gain on defence. But elsewhere there is, because they're ignoring the fact that actually a motivated NHS workforce, motivated teachers, tend to have higher productivity and therefore produce more output, which is directly beneficial in the case of the NHS, because people aren't on waiting lists anymore, and therefore they're working, and therefore they're paying tax. An amazing consequence which they're ignoring. So all of this whole approach, we can't afford to pay it. Hand-wringing, we can't possibly ask anybody to pay anymore, so that we subsidise these desperately rich police constables. Really? Are they? Come on. Whatever it might be. This absurd idea that we can't afford to pay for public sector workers is implicit in this, and it's completely wrong. It could be paid for. These people add value to society. We should recognise that. So that's completely mad. But there is fundamentally and when I drilled down through it and thought through all these things, I thought, well, why do they want this transfer of money from all these public sector employees who are paying more tax to the Treasury and don't want to give any of it back to the departments, which is what logically you would do to at least part fund the settlement, but they don't want to do any of that. What's that all about? And I wrote another thread recently. I've been in Twitter thread writing mode at the moment because, well, they work well. Quite often my Twitter threads are read by 1 million people, which is kind of freaky. And I'm afraid to say probably more people than read my column in The National. Sorry, but it's probably true.
Well, we have got a paywall on some of your columns, so I suppose.
There you go. That's maybe why. But, anyway, I wrote a thread recently that explained why the government is in need of more money. And the answer, quite simply, is, of course, that it's paying more interest. And one of the biggest components in the increase in its interest cost is the money that they pay to our commercial banks. Well, you know their name. They're called Lloyds or HSBC or Bank of Scotland or Clydesdale or whoever it might be that you're banking with. And they all have maintained banks with the Bank of England, the central bank. One of my regular themes, if you read my column in the National, is that we talk a lot about money and central banks and all those things. They have to maintain accounts with the Bank of England. They pay each other through those accounts that they maintain at the Bank of England. And presuming that you don't bank at the Nationwide, which is where I do, by the way, Laura, which I guess you don't.
I don't know if
No?
we have that here, to be honest.
No, but I do bank at the Building Society. And if I want to pay you, and I did, the payment would have to go through the Bank of England, which very few people realise, because my bank would pay the Bank of England, who would pay your bank, who would then pay you. And so that's what these banks' accounts that they maintain at the Bank of England are for, in sort of rather short summary. But there's £850 billion on those accounts at the moment. That's quite a lot of cash. Yeah, you could survive a weekend on that, I think. And my point is that 850 billion was actually given to the banks, because in 2008 there was 20 billion on those accounts. Why is there so much money now that wasn't there then? Quantitative easing. It created new money. This is the power of the government to create new money. How does it get into the economy? The government gives it to a commercial bank. It leaves it on deposit account. Now, they paid 0.1% interest on those balances only a year or two ago, and now they're paying 5%. Those balances are going to cost something like £45 billion this year, maybe slightly less, but around that sort of figure. Whereas a couple of years ago, they cost £1 billion. Now, in most countries, the amount of interest paid on those balances is not the same as the Bank of England base rate or whatever they have, the European Central Bank base rate or the Bank of Japan base rate or whatever. In fact, it's worth mentioning the European Central Bank and Japan, because they do not do things the way we do. They don't pay full interest on those balances. We choose to. We are giving away over 30 billion a year to our commercial banks so that they can pay flipping great bonuses to bankers as a consequence, who claim they'll have worked so hard to earn them when every single penny of that money was just given to them, basically as a combination of QE and the Bank of England pushing up the interest rate. But the government has chosen to pay that rather than full inflation matching pay rises to public sector workers and to cover the costs so that we don't have cuts in our budgets. So in other words, you can just imagine Rishi Sunak's bedside talk now. Look, I'm so sorry that you're suffering. I'm so sorry we can't pay for your care. I'm so sorry you can't have your operation. I'm sorry you might die as a result. But just think about it. I balance my budget and the bankers are better off as a result. Isn't your sacrifice worthwhile? That's literally how callous this is when you bring it down to a personal level. That's the choice he's made. That's almost the conversation that a doctor is somewhere going to have with a patient. I can't do this for you because we haven't got the budget, because the government chose not to give it to us because they chose to balance their books. And that's how bad this really is. And this whole process of saying, we'll give you a pay rise, we won't negotiate it, you've got no rights as an employee anymore to argue, you're just going to have to take it or leave it, and we're going to cut the service to do that, is a whole part of the process of undermining the whole ethos of public services. I noticed a comment by a chap called Seb Payne this morning on Twitter. Seb Payne used to work for another newspaper. He was
we
a
can
journalist.
mention it. It's okay.
It's the Financial Times.
Yeah, you're allowed to acknowledge other newspapers.
And he wrote for the Financial Times for ages, and very glaringly obvious, he was a fanboy. I used the word probably fairly, actually, to be totally honest, of George Osborne. I think he's even written a biography of him. And now he's quit the Financial Times and is trying to become a Conservative MP. Just think about how misguided a career choice that might be at present, and that gives you some indication of how poor his analysis of the current political situation might be. But he wrote something which said, the best thing that a government can do is less of whatever it is So it needs less healthcare, less social care, less education, less defence, less defence of law, defending law and order. It needs fewer people convicted, fewer people to be punished if they have been convicted, fewer, less expenditure on housing. We don't need, of course, anything on climate change. All of that, whatever it is, the government should do less of it. And that's exactly what we saw today. That's what Rishi Sunak is saying. The government, the best thing the government can do is less of what it's up to. And if we all suffer, well, very sorry, but at least my book's balanced. I am horrified by this decision, and it's going to have a knock-on effect. No politician in Scotland is going to be able to avoid this consequence because it will affect the budget. As I say, it flows through inevitably into Scotland, and that's bad news for everybody.
I mean, thank you so much for that explanation, Richard. This is why we love having you on, because you are really able to kind of make this understandable for us and to translate Tory speak into what's actually happening and what's actually going on. So I have a few comments I just want to point out just before I kind of put my next questions to you. Somebody on YouTube was asking if Sunak said which departments the funding is going to come from. I don't think they have they basically just asked the departments to find their own savings? Is that?
I mean, fundamentally, these points about increasing a few fees on visas and so on are, come on, that's chicken feed, petty cash, whatever. It is just, frankly, just being nasty. If you're old enough to remember Theresa May telling the Tory party that they were the nasty party, they seem to go out of their way to really prove it at the moment. That is just spiteful vindictiveness and nastiness. No, the money is basically going to have to come out of the budgets of the departments who are going to make the payments. But when we're talking about education, healthcare, defence and so on, we're talking about some of the biggest spending departments here. So frankly, there aren't many other departments that are going to be able to cover the cost anyway. So no, this is going to come out of frontline services at some point. There's going to be fewer doctors, fewer operations. There's going to be fewer teachers in schools. Very definitely there'll be fewer teaching assistants who make such a big difference to the outcome for particularly those children with more specialist educational needs. I'm well aware of that. And all of that is going to be directly impacted. I'm sorry, this is just another round of austerity cuts by any other name. Absolutely. All to keep our bankers happy and in the champagne to which they've become accustomed.
100%. I mean, I noticed that Rishi Sunak kept saying during the press conference, oh, it's not about cuts, it's about reprioritization. And I thought they could have come up with some better spin, because that just sounds like another way of saying, we're going to cut here to pay for this here. So I don't know if they need to get Dominic Cummings back in or something to make it a bit more palatable, because that wasn't quite working.
Their spin meisters are very poor, I have to say.
Yeah, reprioritization. It's so clinical. It's not going to really go down well with the public. It's so transparent.
But it's such a Rishi Sunak word, isn't it? Because it has absolutely no element to it that you believe is sincere or true. It's just a word as a technocrat that I pulled out of the pile. There's nothing about that sells this policy. And the policy is unsaleable. What he's saying is, I can't ask you for any more tax to pay these nasty public sector workers. Well, actually, the nearest public sector worker who's going to be paid out of this, to me, is about 10 feet behind me there right now. Because I live in a terraced house, and next door there's a NHS worker. That's how far away it's going to impact as far as I'm concerned. My wife is an NHS pensioner. Bizarrely, and I've got to tell you this, and this is really crazy, NHS pensioners are being paid an inflation plus pay rise. How does that make sense? If you are working in the NHS, you get 6%. If you're an NHS pensioner, you get 10%. No, there is no logic to that, but that's what's going on right now.
Is that because of the triple lock?
Yeah, basically it's reflected inside the NHS pensioners situation. Yeah, crazy but true.
It is. That's a mad policy. So someone else on Facebook called Alex, this is more just a comment, just saying it seems like the Tories are trying to put the country into a recession and pit the population against public sector workers for getting less services. And they asked if they learned their economics from a comic, which I'm sure you probably agree with.
The comic's called The Financial Times, by the way, but apart from that, yeah, it's true.
Uh, yeah, I just want to. This is something that I struggle to wrap my head around as a sort of big economic concept. Why is Rishi Sunak so resistant to borrow to fund a public service pay rise? Why was that just not even an option for the government? Can you explain that for us, Richard?
Well, clearly it is an option for the government. Let's be totally honest. The government is borrowing this year. The government is going to borrow next year. Oh, and the year after, and the year after that, and so on. So it could have borrowed more. And there is no limit at this point of time on the capacity of the market to absorb that borrowing, except, and I've got to put a big except in here, except for the fact that the Bank of England is at the moment trying to sell off a lot of the bonds that it bought during the quantitative easing process. It's already sold off around £50 billion worth of bonds that it bought as a result of QE, which paid for the global financial crisis of 2008 and which paid for furlough and everything else during the COVID crisis. There's no reason for the Bank of England to sell one penny of those bonds. It doesn't need to. There's no pressure on it to do so. And no other central bank around the world is doing it. We are absolutely unique in doing that. So why is it doing it? Because it wants to actually put pressure on interest rates to go up. That's what it's trying to do by selling more bonds. That pushes the price of bonds down, which forces the interest rate up. That's how that inverse relationship works. So they're trying to make us all worse off by doing that policy. Blunt, straightforward, clear policy. And Rishi Sunak doesn't want to borrow anymore, not because he can't, because he could, but because he doesn't want to, which is something fundamentally different. You know, it's rather like feeding a 2-year-old. You know they could eat what's on their plate, and you know they did yesterday, but today they just don't want to. And it's flipping frustrating to deal with somebody so immature and stupid. But you put up with it when it's a 2-year-old and you love them. But frankly, I don't love Rishi Sunak and I don't want to put up with it. I mean, it is that immature, though. It's that stupid. The point is, they could borrow this, but he doesn't want to. Now, why doesn't he want to? Because he wants to shrink the size of the state. As whoever it was just wrote the comment that you read, and I didn't hear you mention a name, Laura, so if I missed it, I apologise. But whoever read that comment about, this is policy to shrink the size of the state, to shrink our public services and to create austerity, that's it. That is the only reason why he won't borrow. He could, he should, but he won't. I bet he doesn't eat his greens either.
No, doesn't he drink loads of like full fat Coke? That's definitely not good from a health perspective. But someone called Irene on YouTube has commented to say people have puzzled over why a multimillionaire would want to be PM, but this explains a lot. He's a puppet assigned to expand money supply for the financial sector while shrinking the public sector. So that kind of aligns with what you were just saying as well there, Richard.
It is, and you have to ask the question: why has he taken on something that he's discovered? Well, as a result of taking it, he's discovered two things. For the first time in his life, I'm quite sure Rishi Sunak has discovered he can't do something. Everyone has told him he's such a bright boy until now. His parents did, and they sent him off to Winchester, and they told him he was a bright boy, so they sent him off to Oxford, and Oxford told him he was a bright boy, so he went off to Goldman Sachs, and he made a great big pile of money, so he became an MP, and he thought he was oh so clever, and he went to the Treasury, and everyone said, you were so right to do furlough, Rishi. And then he became Prime Minister, and he discovered, I don't know what to do now, and I don't know how to do this job, and it's flipping hard. So he's discovered the reality. We have promoted him beyond his ability. That's the first fact that is obviously true. We used to have Prime Ministers who seemed able to do the jobs, but not in the most recent years and the most recent incumbents. But secondly, he did go there for one reason, and it really was in pursuit of the career path that some people at these big financial banks do. They go into government for a while, and then they hope to come back into the bank, having made a great deal of influence, a great deal of contacts, massively improved their telephone contact book or their email list, and think that people will listen to them, and therefore they go back and make a great deal more money afterwards by selling their services back to the bankers from whence they came. He clearly thought he'd do that. I think he's had a very rude shock over the last few months. He's realised that being Prime Minister is not easy, and it requires making big, brave decisions. And quite clearly, we have learned that Rishi Sunak is not up to making big, brave decisions, but he thought he could, and he can't. And he's not alone. Boris Johnson thought he could make big, brave decisions, and he most certainly couldn't do anything of that sort. Theresa May wasn't much better. David Cameron wasn't much better. Well, let's forget Liz Truss, shall we? But, we did at one time have some politicians who were quite good. I mean, I'm old enough to remember some very powerful people who were there because they had a social purpose for being Prime Minister. Did Rishi Sunak have a social purpose for being Prime Minister? No, come on. He just wanted to improve his contact list so that when he goes back to California, as I am sure he will, because why else did he give a £10 bottle of wine to his local school fete in Yorkshire, his constituency, but gave £3 million donation, dollars donation to a university in California. Just a little difference in scale there. Where do you think he's going to end up after he's been Prime Minister? I think back in California, being a banker. That's what he hoped for. It all turned out rather nasty for him. What a shame.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm finding it hard to muster up any sympathy for him, really, Richard.
I wasn't really looking for a sympathy vote with that one.
Didn't think so. I just want to loop back to what we were saying about how Rishi wants to kind of shrink the size of the state. Now, is his objective with this, with making all these cuts and whatnot, that he thinks austerity creates growth? Is that the belief that these people have?
Well, look, I mean, this is their belief. They believe that we can't have a state unless we have a strong private sector. So we can't have a nurse unless somebody has sold a lot of bubblegum or cigarettes or vapes or one heck of a lot of sugary sweets which create obesity, driving people into the hands of the nurse next along. But no, whatever it is, they think that we cannot afford this because they think that the private sector pays for the state sector. I actually have done another tweet thread on that this morning, literally this morning, because this is just so wrong. I'm not anti-private sector. I mean, I'm a chartered accountant. I was senior partner of a firm of accountants. I've created lots of companies. I've been a director of quite a lot of companies. I've employed a lot of people. Don't ever have me on the list of I hate the private sector. I know how it works. I've worked in it. I've enjoyed it. I also know how the state sector works. Actually, what I know is that one is utterly dependent on the other. And it doesn't matter whether you start with saying the state is utterly dependent upon the private sector, or whether you start with saying the private sector is utterly dependent upon the state. They are mutually interdependent. The private sector has to have the state to create regulation. It has to have the state to create contract law, because without contract law, there is no private sector. It has to have taxes, actually, because that gives money its value. It has to have regulation, because that keeps the cheats, the crooks, and everybody else out of the market and lets the market work. It is also dependent upon the state supplying educated people. When I was an employer, let's say at the time I was senior partner of a firm of accountants, we had a policy of recruiting somebody out of school, at least one every year, straight out of school. And it was deliberate. We wanted to provide a young person with an opportunity, at least one. We needed them, however, to have been trained to a certain degree before we got hold of them. We relied upon the state to provide healthcare to our staff, because we didn't provide private insurance for that. We relied upon the state to ensure the risk that if we went belly up, at least they were going to have a social safety net to keep them safe whilst they were looking for another job. And ultimately, we did have a contributory pension arrangement, but we relied on the state to provide the basic old age pension as well. In other words, our safety net as an employer, as a business, was the state. In exchange, because the state provided most of those services to us for nothing, we paid taxes. We got those services all for free. We couldn't run the business without them, but we had to pay taxes in exchange. There was a mutually symbiotic relationship, which meant that there was a movement to and from each sector all day, every day, which was to the benefit of everyone. They don't get that. They think that there is only the state leeching on the private sector. But if they carry on with that view, what happens is the state can't support the private sector in its goal to make money, in its goal to do anything. And we're seeing that. Why is growth so stagnant? Why does everybody I meet says, this country's broken? And it doesn't matter which country I'm in. I've been in Scotland recently, I've been in Wales recently, I've been in England recently, I haven't been to Northern Ireland for a bit. But everybody says the same. I've had conversations in Northern Ireland recently with people quite senior in their government. I mean the civil servants. So Look, it's broken. And it won't be broke. It won't be repaired until we understand that the state and the private sector have to produce a solution together. While we have ministers, whilst we have opposition politicians who think that we're utterly dependent upon the private sector to pay for the state, we are in deep, deep trouble. It is only by creating a genuine mixed economy where state and private sectors really begin to work together in harmony, trying to do the best that they can for each other so that each of them can do best what they're best able to do. And there are some things the state should never do. It should never make ice cream. History proves that it probably shouldn't try and make cars either, because they weren't very good when it did. But there are things that the private sector really isn't very good at. It cannot provide mass healthcare or mass education or mass social care and all sorts of other things. So each should do what they're good at and get on with it and recognise the contribution the other has to make to their well-being. When we get to that state, which isn't really reflected terribly well in anyone's manifestos at present, although Scotland is a lot more aware of this than England is, and I have to say overall Scotland is a lot more aware of this than England is, but still not strongly enough, then we will get to the point where we can build the type of economy we really need. That's the type of economy that I dream of for an independent Scotland, by the way. And I think there's much more chance of Scotland doing that than England, where the absurdity of the belief that the state is just a pariah leeching off the private sector is just so commonplace amongst those who are in business that it's crazy.
Yeah, it's I'm glad that we got into all of that, because that's a lot of what we've been talking about in our new Scotonomics newsletter,
Yeah.
which you might be aware of. And
am.
yeah, I'm just going to plug that. If you are interested, dear viewers, in learning more about how the economy works and some kind of alternative viewpoints on how the state could approach the economy, then do sign up for our free Scotonomics newsletter. It goes out every single Tuesday. And I've been finding it really educational, really interesting, and it's been growing really fast. So I think a lot of you have as well. And so if you're interested, tell your friends about it. And yeah, Richard, you've retweeted it a few times, so thank you for pushing that out there.
Well, I believe in it. I mean, it's a good organisation as well. Scotonomics also do some great podcasts and things. I think that's Monday night, by the way. I'll give them a plug even for that.
Yeah, they're great. We've really enjoyed working with them so far. So just on the topic of this announcement today, what happens next, Richard? Do you think that the trade unions are going to be happy and give up on their strikes and say this is all fine? Do you think that things are going to just continue the way that they have been for the last year? It seems like there's a lot of criticism of the policy, so it's hard to imagine all the trade union leaders saying, yep, okay, that's it, everything's good. So what do you think happens now?
Look, I think that there are some people who have run out of capacity to strike. The trade unions for teachers appear to have accepted this deal. I don't think they believe they can get another strike vote through, and I don't think at the moment that capacity exists amongst nurses. So I think the government has sort of read what it thinks are the runes and said people haven't got enough cash left to be able to afford to strike again. What they are forgetting, and I think they are really seriously forgetting, is that they're now up against a different group of people. I think the people who are going to really make a big difference at this moment are the doctors. I think junior doctors are really angry. I think we're going to see a great many junior doctors leaving the health service in England this August. Young doctors work on what is called a rotation. I know my retired NHS wife was a doctor until she retired on the grounds of ill health. And young doctors work on what is called a rotation, and they change jobs every 6 months. So 6 months they do, in geriatrics, and then they might do psychiatry, and then they might do whatever, obstetrics. But there's a change in August, and a lot of them are thinking of leaving and going to Australia. Having done 2 years post-qualification, they quit. There's a lot of more senior doctors who actually can afford to pursue pay disputes. And the consultants have seen a net real pay cut over the last decade or so of around 30%, 1/3. And they are really angry about that. And I think if you get a combination of junior and consultant doctors coming together to actually object to this, we're in trouble. There's no one to cover for them. We've got 5 days of strikes coming up now. I don't see them ending. The government's saying that's it, tough, we're not going to pay you anymore. I don't think that group's going to accept that. There are some other groups that won't. I'm not sure that barristers who are working on defence cases are too keen to accept this either. So that could have a serious pinch effect. These are what you call the pinch points, the people you can't survive without, where you really begin to upset the critical people who absolutely make the systems work. And I think that there's too many of those. And we've also seen a group who have not yet gone on strike in the education sector in England, who are now talking about it. And they're the head teachers. And I was a school governor, chair of governors for many years of schools in London, actually, when I lived there. 15 years I did as a school chair of governors of schools. So I know a lot about the job of a head teacher because I work very closely with them. It's very hard to run a school without a good head teacher. Very, very hard. And if they're not around, it's very hard to actually keep a school open. If the deputy head goes as well, you're in deep trouble. You have not got the safety systems in place to manage things. So there are a lot of senior staff who've now had enough. And I think we are not therefore going to see the end of the strikes. We're just going to see more senior people who can afford to be on strike for longer going out. The government is not going to see what it wants, which is the end of industrial strife. It's going to continue.
And of course, there was no decision on transport today as well. So the RMT, for example, are still looking for some kind of solution. And it feels like they've done this today to make it sound like everything's all good and everything's doing better. And it also distracts from the fact that the economy shrunk in the last quarter. And to ignore the fact that even though we had a coronation, which we said would be good for the economy, and actually the economy shrunk, everything's good, everything's fine. But in actual fact, it's not. And there's a lot of people out there who are still involved in industrial action who today it doesn't make any difference for them.
Can I flag up, by the way, I am aware that junior doctors have settled in Scotland. I know that has happened because they've got a decent pay rise in Scotland, decent-ish anyway, above inflation. And so it should have been because it's been so long and so limited. I mean, what is really, really so crazy about this situation, and I find this so weird, these people claim that they are so pro-market and they're running the government. If they were so understanding of markets and they were losing staff hand over fist because those staff can't afford to work for them, they would understand that the thing they've got to do ultimately is put up the wage rate to attract people in again. But apparently they don't. You know, when I ran a firm of accountants, I always remember this one because this is one I was particularly involved with this decision. Because other companies I ran had co-directors who didn't always agree with me, very inconvenient. But in the firm of accountants, we always were of one mind. We always paid our staff at least 10% above the going rate. Why? Because we got good people who were motivated, who we could invest in because they would stay, because they knew we'd keep on paying them above the going rate. And when they got better, we'd pay them more. And you know, that made so much sense. But these people apparently think that paying less than the going rate is what motivates people. I mean, are they stupid? Have they learned anything? Have they managed a paper bag, let alone a nationalised industry before now? I don't know. I just don't really understand what they know about anything to do with management, motivation, people, politics, economics. It appears they know remarkably little. It's really scary. I love it. I was actually accused last weekend on national radio in England of being an ivory tower professor by somebody who had spent the last 30 years working as policy wonk in think tanks. And I greatly enjoy pointing out that actually, yeah, I am actually a professor now, but only part-time. And actually, over the last 40 years, I've been a chartered accountant, and I have been a practicing chartered accountant for that long. I still have clients. I still deal with people in the real world. You know, I'm no policy wonk. I'm actually hard and fast, nose to the grindstone, if you like, seeing the real world out there, as well as being a theoretician and writing for the National every now and again. Every Thursday morning, actually, I wake up on Thursday morning and think, what have I got to write today to keep Laura happy? It's such a simple routine.
Have you sent your column today, actually?
Yes.
Okay, that's fine. I'll have to check in my email. I don't think
Well, I think I have. I've certainly written it. I'm sure I've mailed it.
I trust you, honestly. You've never missed a deadline, and you've often saved my skin on several occasions when I needed someone to file last minute. So, yes, thank you for that. I hope you don't take offense from that.
Now I'm going
Thank you.
to have to leave this podcast, our live cast, and go and check it. Yeah.
No, thank you so much, Richard. It's always great having you on to explain these things in such an understandable way. And obviously, the pieces of writing that you do are great for explaining, but we find that people quite like being able to just put their headphones on and maybe listen to the explanation while they're on the bus or commuting or something like that. So we're so grateful for your time. And yes, if you want to read Richard's latest piece for us, he will be in today's online edition. As soon as I get off this call, I'll deal with that.
And as soon as I check, I've sent it.
Yes.
It has been a busy day, I admit, but I thought I had. Anyway, there we go, folks. You've just heard live editor and columnist wondering where today's column has gone.
The glamorous industry. Right, fantastic. I'm gonna end that for now. But guys, if you have any more questions for Richard, do get in touch and we'll put them to him for his next columns. So
Yeah,
thank
please
you.
do. I do like answering people's questions. Sometimes it just, sometimes I wake up, I know exactly what I'm going to write for Laura on a Thursday morning. Other days I sit there thinking, what do people want to know? And sometimes getting the odd clue does help. So I'm very happy to get questions sent my way.
Yes, fantastic. Well, we'll keep an eye out for those. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone, and I'll see you all soon.